Carol wants a sophisticated wedding, Dad explained over the phone, his voice dropping to that whisper he always used when she was in the room. Her business friends are all coming. You would just not fit. I hung up the phone and my hand hovered over the keyboard. On my screen was the investment portfolio for Project Phoenix, the company seeking our capital. Carol is the CEO. I typed a single email to my partners. Withdraw all capital. Carol's phone was about to explode. But first let me tell you how I bought the venue. She was getting married in. My name is Sophia. I am 32 years old and I learned the hard way that blood does not make you family. Before I destroy my father's ego and bank account, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe. If you have ever been the black sheep who turned into the greatest success story your family never saw coming. I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The fog was rolling in, over the Golden Gate Bridge, a view that cost my firm $25,000 a month in rent. On my desk sat a thick file marked Confidential Due Diligence. Inside were the financial records for a boutique marketing firm called Prestige Group. They were desperate for a Series A funding round of $4.7 million to stay afloat. The CEO was a woman named Carol Miller, my father's fiancée. My intercom buzzed, pulling me away from the balance sheets. It was my assistant Sarah telling me that my father Marcus was online. 1. I checked my Patek Philippe watch. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Dad never called during the day. He usually only called when he needed to remind me how much of a disappointment I was compared to Carol. I picked up the phone expecting a lecture about my life choices. Instead, I got silence, followed by a nervous clearing of the throat. Sophia, look, we need to talk about next weekend. Dad said. I could hear the hesitation in his voice the way he always sounded when he was trying to spin bad news into something that sounded reasonable. It is about the wedding in Martha's Vineyard. I leaned back in my Herman Miller chair, spinning a silver pen between my fingers. I am listening, Dad, I said. My flight is already booked. I got a non-refundable ticket, just like you asked. There was a long pause. Yeah, about that, Dad said quickly. Carol and I have been talking over the guest list. We are finalizing the seating charts, and while we have run into a bit of an issue, the venue is smaller than we thought, and Carol has invited a lot of high-net-worth individuals, potential investors for her company, key stakeholders. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew exactly where this was going, but I wanted to hear him say it. So there is no room for your daughter, I asked, keeping my voice even. It is not just space, Sophia. Dad sighed, and I heard Carol whispering something in the background. He lowered his voice. He said, Carol is worried about the aesthetic. You know how she is about image. She wants to keep it classy, sophisticated. She thinks that, well, your lifestyle might clash with the vibe we are going for. My lifestyle. I looked down at my tailored blazer, which was bespoke from Italy. I looked at the term sheet on my desk, worth millions. I realized he was talking about the car I drove to Christmas dinner last year. A 2015 Honda Civic. I kept it because it was reliable, and because I did not feel the need to flash my wealth. But to Marcus and Carol, that car was proof that I was struggling, proof that I was the failure. They always claimed I was. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice dropping an octave. You are uninviting me from your wedding because you think I am too poor to be around Carol's rich friends? Dad made a noise of frustration. Do not make this about money, Sophia. It is about fitting in. You show up in that old car wearing those plain clothes you always wear. It makes people uncomfortable. Carol is trying to close deals at this wedding. We cannot have any distractions. We just want to keep it classy. You understand, right? The word classy hung in the air like a bad joke. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that the only reason Carol's company was even being considered for funding was because my junior analyst thought the concept had potential. I wanted to tell him that I was the managing partner of Obsidian Ventures, the very firm Carol was trying to impress. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "Fine, Dad," I said calmly. "I will not come. I would hate to ruin the aesthetic." "Great. Thanks for being understanding, sweetie," Dad said, sounding relieved. "And hey, you can still send a gift. Carol has a registry at Neiman Marcus. Just make sure it is something appropriate. No handmade cards or sentimental stuff. Okay? She is allergic to cheap things." He hung up without saying, "I love you." I sat there for a moment staring at the phone. The humiliation burned hot in my chest, not because I wasn't invited, but because he chose her vanity over his own child. He chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of family. He wanted classy. I would give him classy. I looked back at the file on my desk. Project Phoenix, Carol Miller, CEO. She had applied through a broker, so she had no idea who actually sat in this chair. She had no idea that the decision to give her that $4.7 million rested entirely in my hands. My finger hovered over the reject button on my screen. It would be so easy to crush her right now, to send an automated email telling her that her company was worthless, just like she thought I was. But that was too easy. That wasn't enough. I didn't just want to reject her. I wanted to see her face when she realized exactly who she had uninvited. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, cancel my meetings for next week." "Are we rejecting the Prestige Group proposal?" Sarah asked. I looked at the file and a slow smile spread across my face. "No, keep the file open," I said, and call the Harbor View Hotel in Martha's Vineyard. Tell them the new owner is coming to inspect the property. And Sarah, tell them, I will be needing the presidential suite, the one the Miller wedding party tried to book but couldn't afford. I am going to do some due diligence in person. I drove my battered Honda Civic to the luxury apartment complex where my father and Carol were staying. It was a short drive from my office, but it felt like traveling between two different worlds. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that advertised valet parking and a 24-hour concierge to make the tenants feel important. I knew for a fact that Carol was renting the penthouse on a short-term lease, burning through cash she did not have, just to keep up appearances. Meanwhile, I owned the building across the street through a holding company, but I parked my car around the corner so they wouldn't see me coming. I checked the envelope in my purse. Inside was a cashier check for $10,000. It was drawn from a personal savings account I kept for emergencies, not my main assets. It was a test, really. If my father accepted it with grace, if Carol showed even an ounce of gratitude, I might have reconsidered destroying her business. I might have just declined the investment quietly and moved on with my life. But as I walked into the marble lobby, I had a feeling that grace was not on the menu for today. I took the elevator up to the penthouse floor. The doors opened directly into their foyer. I could already hear music thumping from inside, something loud and trendy that did not match my father's taste at all. I rang the bell and waited. Moments later, the door swung open and I was face to face with Julian Carroll's 25-year-old son. He was holding a ring light in one hand and his phone in the other, evidently in the middle of filming content for his social media followers. He looked me up and down, his lip curling in a sneer that seemed practiced. Julian was the definition of an influencer without influence. He wore a designer t-shirt with a logo so big it looked desperate, and his hair was styled perfectly into a messy look that probably took an hour to achieve. "Oh, it is you," Julian said, not bothering to step aside. "Mom, the charity case is here?" I stepped past him into the living room. The place was decorated in aggressive shades of white and beige, terrified of any actual color. Carol was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window holding a glass of champagne, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. My father was sitting on the edge of a white leather sofa, looking uncomfortable in a stiff linen suit. "Sophia, Dad stood up, his eyes darting to Carol nervously. We didn't think you were coming by, especially after the call. I wanted to drop this off before you left for the vineyard, I said, keeping my voice soft and deferential. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I know I am not invited to the wedding, and I respect that, but I still wanted to contribute this. It is for the honeymoon, or whatever you need. Carol turned slowly, her eyes locking onto the envelope in my hand. She took a sip of champagne and walked over her heels, clicking sharply on the polished floor. She snatched the envelope from me without a thank you and tore it open. Her manicured fingers pulled out the check, and she stared at it for a long moment. $10,000. Carol read the number out loud, her voice flat. She looked at my father and then burst into a high-pitched laugh. Julian, who had been filming the whole interaction from the corner, zoomed in on my face. $10,000? Carol repeated, shaking her head. Is this a joke, Sophia? Is this supposed to make us feel guilty? Because it feels more like an insult. It is my savings. I lied smoothly. It is everything I could scrape together right now. Dad looked at the check and then at me. Sophia, this is a lot of money for you. You should keep it. You need it more than we do. Oh, please, Marcus, stop coddling her, Carol interrupted. She waved the check in my face like it was a dirty tissue. You think this buys you a seat at the table? Dawn, not you. You think you can throw your little waitress tips at us, and we will forget that you do not fit in with our brand. Let me tell you something, sweetie. $10,000 does not even cover the floral arrangements for the head table. It barely covers the champagne budget for the rehearsal dinner. She was performing now, playing to an audience of 2. Julian was snickering behind his phone screen, capturing every second of my humiliation. For his stories, Mom tell her what real money looks like. Julian goaded from the sidelines. Tell her about the investors coming to the wedding. We have people coming who sign checks with 6 zeros before breakfast, Carol said, stepping closer into my personal space. Her perfume was overpowering, something floral and expensive that barely masked the scent of desperation underneath. Real players, Sophia. Not little girls playing house with their savings accounts. We are building an empire here. Prestige. Marketing is about to go global. Thanks to the connections we will solidify at this wedding. We need elegance. We need class. We do not need you trying to buy your way back into the family with chump change. The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say that his daughter meant more to him than a floral arrangement. But he just looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. He was weak. He had traded his dignity for a woman who viewed him as an accessory, and now he was letting her trample on the only child who actually loved him. This is what I think of your contribution, Carol said. She held the check up between 2 fingers, and with a dramatic flourish, she ripped it in half. Then she ripped it again and again until the blue paper drifted down to the white rug like confetti. Keep your money, Sophia, Carol sneered. Buy yourself some new clothes. Maybe you won't look so pathetic next time we run into each other. Now please leave. We have a plane to catch and the air in here is starting to smell like poverty. Julian laughed openly now, pointing his phone camera right at the torn pieces of paper on the floor. Guys, you are not going to believe this, he said to his virtual audience. My stepsister just tried to bribe her way into the wedding of the century with her rent money. Can we get a sad emoji in the chat? I stood there for a second, looking at the confetti on the floor. It was the best investment I had ever made. That $10,000 had just bought me absolute moral clarity. I felt the last lingering thread of attachment to my father snap. It was a clean break, painless and final. I understand. I said, my voice steady. I hope you have the wedding you deserve. I turned and walked out the door, not looking back. I could hear Carol laughing as the door clicked shut behind me, meaningless noise fading into the background. I took the elevator down to the lobby, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of war. I walked out of the building and around the corner to my car. The Honda looked dusty in the afternoon light, but I didn't get in. Instead, I leaned against the hood and pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for the private client services division of my bank. It rang once before a human picked up instantly. Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks. How can we assist you today? I need you to authorize a temporary lift on my black card spending limit, I said, watching the penthouse balcony from the street. I am going to Martha's Vineyard for a few days, and I plan on making some significant acquisitions. Of course, Ms. Brooks. What is the new limit you would like to set? I looked up at the sky, watching a plane trace a white line across the blue. No limit, I said coldly. Unlock everything. I'm going to buy the whole damn island if I have to. I hung up the phone and got into my car. As I drove away, I wasn't Sophia, the rejected daughter, anymore. I was the storm that was heading straight for their perfect classy wedding, and they didn't even have an umbrella. The ferry ride over to Martha's Vineyard was calm, but the storm I was carrying inside me was just getting started. I had taken a private charter to avoid running into my father and his new family on the public ferry. Plus, it gave me time to review the acquisition documents with my legal team. By the time my black SUV pulled up to the entrance of the Harborview Hotel, I was no longer just a rejected daughter. I was a predator entering my hunting ground. The hotel was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, with white porches wrapping around the building and the ocean stretching out endlessly in the background. It was exactly the kind of old money aesthetic Carol was desperate to be associated with. I told my driver to wait for a moment as I watched the scene unfolding at the front desk through the tinted windows of my car. It was perfect timing. Carol, Marcus, and Julian were standing at the check-in counter, and even from inside the car, I could see the tension in my father's shoulders. Carol was gesturing wildly at the young woman behind the desk, her voice loud enough to carry across the lobby. I stepped out of the car, smoothing down my linen trousers, and walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open, and the sound of Carol's shrill voice hit me like a physical blow. "I am telling you to run it again!" Carol was shouting, slapping a platinum-colored credit card onto the marble counter. "There is plenty of money on there. I am the CEO of Prestige Marketing Group. For God's sake, do you know who I am?" I stood near a potted palm tree, partially hidden, observing the humiliation. The receptionist looked terrified, but held her ground. "I apologize, Mrs. Miller, but the system is declining the transaction. The code indicates insufficient funds or a freeze by the issuer. Perhaps you have another card we could try." My father Marcus looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. He was patting his pockets nervously, checking his wallet, even though he knew he had drained his accounts to pay for the rehearsal dinner engagement party. Carol snatched the card back, her face turning a dangerous shade of red. "This is ridiculous," Carol hissed loudly, causing several guests in the lobby to turn and stare. "You people clearly have a broken system. I booked the oceanfront suites months ago. You are going to ruin my wedding weekend because of your incompetence." Julian, who was standing next to a pile of Louis Vuitton luggage that I knew for a fact were knockoffs, spotted me first. He nudged Carol and pointed his finger accusingly right at me. "Mom, look!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. "It is the stalker. She followed us here." Carol whipped around, her eyes widening with a mix of fury and confusion. She marched over to me, leaving my poor father alone with the receptionist, who was now whispering to security. "What the hell are you doing here, Sophia?" Carol demanded, getting right in my face. "I told you explicitly that you were uninvited. Did you really drive all the way here to beg? Are you?" That pathetic Julian already had his phone out filming me. "Mom, she is totally stalking us. This is creepy behavior. Sophia, seriously, get a life. You are obsessed with us." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Before I could even open my mouth, the door behind the reception desk opened, and a tall, impeccably dressed man in a dark suit hurried out. It was Henry Sterling, the general manager of the hotel, whom I had met several times at private equity galas in San Francisco. He completely ignored Carol and Julian, walking straight past them to me with his hand extended. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "Welcome back to the vineyard. We were not expecting you until this evening, but we are delighted you are here." Carol stopped mid-rant, her mouth hanging open. She looked from Henry to me, unable to process why the general manager was greeting her stepdaughter like royalty. "Thank you, Henry," I said, shaking his hand calmly. My plans changed slightly. I decided to come early to handle some business. Is my usual arrangement available? Henry nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely, Ms. Brooks. We have prepared the presidential penthouse suite for you, just as your office requested. The chef has also prepared that sea bass dish you enjoyed last summer. Shall I have your bags taken up immediately? The silence from Carol's group was deafening. The presidential penthouse was the crown jewel of the hotel, the exact room Carol had been bragging about on Facebook for months, claiming she was going to stay there. But here she was with a declined credit card, realizing she couldn't even afford the lobby air conditioning while the uninvited guest was being escorted to the top floor. "Wait a minute," Carol sputtered, stepping between me and Henry. "There must be a mistake. We requested the penthouse. My husband and I are the ones getting married here. Surely we should have priority over her. She is just a guest." Henry looked at Carol with a polite but icy expression. "I am afraid the penthouse is reserved exclusively for our VIP members and guests of the ownership group. Ms. Brooks' reservation is confirmed. And regarding your payment issue, Mrs. Miller, unless you can provide a valid form of payment within the next 10 minutes, we will have to release your standard rooms to other guests." Carol's face went pale. She looked at me, expecting me to crumble to offer my card to help them out, like I used to do when I was desperate for her approval. But I just smiled, a small, cold smile. "It looks like you have some things to figure out, Carol," I said softly. "Try to keep it classy, though. Shouting in the lobby isn't a good look for the brand." I turned to follow Henry to the elevators, leaving them standing amidst their fake designer luggage. Julian was still filming, but he looked confused now, unsure how to spin this for his audience. As I walked toward the elevator banks, the glass doors opened again, and a man walked in. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a bespoke Italian suit that screamed power and influence. It was James Sterling, my lead attorney and one of the most feared corporate litigators in New York. He saw me and his face lit up. "Sophia, my dear," James boomed, walking over to kiss me on the cheek. "You made good time. I have the papers ready for the acquisition whenever you want to review them." I saw Carol watching us from the check-in desk, where she was frantically trying a fourth credit card. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at James and then back at me. I could see the gears turning in her small mind. She saw an older, wealthy white man greeting a young black woman with familiarity. She saw the expensive clothes, the penthouse access, and suddenly it all made sense to her. She didn't know James was my lawyer. She didn't know I was a shark. She leaned over to my father and whispered loudly enough for me to hear just before the elevator doors closed. "Oh my God, Marcus, I figured it out. That is how she affords it." Carol whispered, a look of disgust and triumph on her face. "Your daughter is a sugar baby. That old man is paying for everything she is selling herself. Marcus, that is why she has cash. She is nothing but a high-class escort." The elevator doors slid shut, blocking out their judgmental faces. I looked at my reflection in the polished brass doors and laughed. I turned to James, who looked confused by the scene he had just walked into. "Everything all right, Sophia?" James asked. "Everything is perfect, James," I said, checking my phone to see a notification that Carol's credit card had been declined for the 5th time. "Let them think what they want. It will make the truth hurt so much more when I take everything they have." The Atlantic restaurant at the Harbor View Hotel was the kind of place where the lighting was always dim enough to hide wrinkles, but bright enough to make diamonds sparkle. I sat at a corner table with the best view of the Edgartown Lighthouse, enjoying a glass of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than the suit my father was wearing. The irony was delicious. I was sipping was wine that aged better than my relationship with my family while watching them self-destruct from 20 feet away. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing at a long table in the center of the room. Carol had insisted on this location, claiming it was the only place on the island that met her standards for culinary excellence. She did not know that I was a silent investor in the restaurant group, or that the staff had been briefed on exactly who I was earlier that afternoon. I watched Carol holding court at the head of the table. She was laughing too loudly, her movements jerky and frantic. She kept glancing around the room, making sure people were watching her, making sure everyone knew she was the queen bee. But every time her eyes landed on me, her smile faltered. It was like a glitch in a computer program. Finally, she snapped. She waved a manicured hand at the maitre d', a patient Frenchman named Philippe, who had known me for years. I saw her pointing aggressively in my direction, her lips moving. Fast, I could read the words even from this distance, she was saying. Get her out of here. She is ruining the privacy. Philippe nodded politely, his face a mask of professional indifference, and walked toward my table. I took a slow sip of my wine, waiting for the confrontation. Mademoiselle Brooks. Philippe said, his voice low and respectful. I apologize for the disturbance. The woman at the center table seems to be under the impression that this is a private event. She has requested that we ask you to leave. I smiled, placing my glass down gently. Is that so, Philippe? And what did you tell her? I informed her that the restaurant is open to the public. Philippe said, a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. And more importantly, I informed her that as a Platinum Legacy member of the resort, you have priority seating indefinitely. I offered to move her party to the patio if your presence was too distressing for her. I laughed softly. The patio was freezing tonight. The wind off the ocean would ruin Carol's hair in 3 minutes. No, that won't be necessary. Philippe, I am quite comfortable here. Let them enjoy their meal, or at least try to. Felipe bowed slightly and retreated. I watched him deliver the news to Carol. Her face went from smug to purple in a matter of seconds. She slammed her napkin down on the table and turned to my father, whispering furiously into his ear. She was winding him up like a toy soldier, pointing at me, crying fake tears, dabbing at eyes that were perfectly dry. Moments later, Marcus stood up. He adjusted his jacket, trying to look authoritative, but he just looked tired. He walked across the dining room, dodging waiters carrying trays of oysters until he reached my table. He stood over me, casting a shadow over my risotto. Hello, Dad, I said, not looking up. Are you enjoying the appetizers? I heard the scallops are excellent tonight. Stop it, Sophia. Dad hissed, his voice shaking. Do you have no shame? You are sitting here staring at us like some kind of vulture. You are making Carol cry. She is in tears over there because you refuse to let us have one night of peace. I finally looked up at him. His eyes were bloodshot and he smelled like stress sweat and cheap cologne. He looked older than I remembered, beaten down by a woman who demanded the world from a man who could barely afford a zip code. I am not doing anything, Dad, I said calmly. I am eating dinner. This is a free country and this is a hotel restaurant. If Carol is crying, that is a reaction to her own insecurity, not my presence. Dawn, not play innocent with me, Marcus snapped, gripping the edge of my table. His knuckles were white. You came here to humiliate us. You knew we would be here. You are trying to flaunt your whatever this is. He gestured vaguely at my clothes and the expensive wine. My success I finished for him. Is that the word you are looking for? You are mad because I am flaunting the success you said I would never have. I am mad because you are cruel, he said, his voice cracking slightly. We are family. Sophia, despite everything. And you are ruining her big moment. She just wants everything to be perfect. Why can't you just leave? Why do you have to be so difficult? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Family, I repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. You uninvited me. Dad, remember? You told me I wasn't classy enough. You chose her aesthetic over your daughter. So do not come over here and preach to me about family obligations. I am a paying customer just like anyone else, actually better than most. Dad looked like he was about to slap me, but he held back, glancing around at the other diners who were starting to watch the scene. "Lower your voice," he whispered. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I am not the one making a scene," I said smoothly. "But since you are here, let us talk about why Carol is actually crying." "Dad? Look at the table." I nodded toward their party. A sommelier was standing next to Carol holding a bottle of champagne, but he wasn't opening it. He was holding a portable credit card terminal and shaking his head politely. Carol was frantically digging through her purse, throwing lipsticks and compacts onto the table, looking for another card. "She is not crying. Because I am here, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the noise. "She is crying because the sommelier just declined her card for the third time." "That is a bottle of Cristal," she ordered. "It is $600, and your wife is broke." Dad whipped his head around, staring at the scene unfolding at his table. He watched as Carol handed the waiter another card, her hands shaking. He saw the waiter insert it, wait a few seconds, and then shake his head again. The humiliation was radiating off her. In waves, I took a sip of my wine, watching the realization sink into my father's eyes. He knew. He knew they were drowning in debt. He knew they were putting on a show they couldn't afford, and he knew that I knew. "It must be hard," I said softly, keeping up with appearances. "The deposit for the room was declined. The dinner bill is being declined. I wonder if the check for the wedding planner cleared yet? Or is that why she is really stressed?" Dad turned back to me, his face pale, defenseless, helplessness replacing the anger. "Sophia," he stammered. There was a mix-up with the bank transfer. It is temporary. We have the funds." "Stop lying, Dad," I said. "It is pathetic." I reached for my purse sitting on the empty chair next to me. I pulled out my black metal Amex card, the one that felt heavy in your hand. It caught the candlelight shimmering with potential. "I can help you," I said, holding the card between two fingers. "I can call Philippe over right now. I can tell him to put your entire rehearsal dinner on my tab. The champagne, the scallops, the steaks, all of it. It is nothing to me." A rounding error. Dad stared at the card. It was a lifeline. It was dignity. It was a way to stop the waiter from walking away with the champagne bottle, which he was currently doing much to Carol's horror. "All you have to do is ask," I said simply. "Ask me to pay for it. Admit that you need me. Admit that you were wrong to treat me like garbage, and I will save your night right now." For a second, I thought he would do it. I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the desperate longing for relief. But then he looked over at Carol. She was glaring at us, her eyes filled with hate, even as she was being humiliated. She would rather sink the ship than let me be the captain. Dad straightened up, pulling his jacket tight. It was a hollow gesture of pride from a man who had nothing left to be proud of. "We do not need your charity, Sophia," he spat out, trying to regain his composure. "We are fine. Keep your dirty money. We have plenty of other cards." He turned and walked away, his steps stiff and awkward. He marched back to the table, pulled out his wallet, and handed the waiter a debit card. I knew was linked to his retirement account. I watched as the transaction went through. The waiter finally opened the champagne. Carol took a huge gulp, not even waiting for a toast. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't thank him. She just went back to pretending she was the queen of the world. I signaled Philippe for my check. I had lost my appetite. But the game wasn't over yet. Tomorrow was the wedding, and if they thought a declined credit card was bad, wait until they saw what I had planned for the ceremony. The morning sun over Edgartown was deceptive. It painted the ocean in shades of peaceful turquoise that completely contradicted the chaos erupting inside the Harborview Hotel lobby. I was sitting in a high-backed velvet chair near the grand staircase, enjoying a cup of Blue Mountain coffee and reviewing the final term sheet on my tablet. The hotel staff gave me a wide berth, offering silent nods of respect as they passed. They knew who I was. They knew I could buy this building tomorrow if I felt like it. But my family, they were still living in a delusion of their own. Making. Peace was shattered by a scream that sounded like a banshee in distress. I looked up to see Carol stumbling down the hallway that led to the bridal suites. She was wearing her wedding dress, a massive intricate gown of lace and silk that must have cost a fortune. But right now she looked less like a bride and more like a disaster. The back of the dress was gaping open, exposing her corset and pale skin. She was clutching the fabric frantically, her face a mask of sheer panic. "Where is the seamstress?" Carol shrieked at a passing housekeeper. I fired the last one because she looked at me wrong. "Get me someone who knows how to sew immediately." The poor housekeeper stammered something about the on-call, Taylor being away, and Carol let out a growl of frustration. Then her eyes locked on me. I saw the calculation happen in her brain. In her world, I wasn't a venture capitalist or a property mogul. I was just Marcus' daughter. The girl who should be grateful for scraps. The girl who probably knew how to fix things, because that is what people like me did for people like her. "You," Carol barked, marching over to me with the dress trailing behind her like a deflated parachute. "Thank God you are here." "Get up!" I slowly lowered my coffee cup, not moving an inch. "I beg your pardon?" "My zipper," Carol hissed, turning around to show me the broken track along her spine. It snapped. I must have... It must be the humidity. "Look, you know how to fix this, right? Your grandmother was a seamstress or something, wasn't she? It is in your blood. Just grab a kit from the front desk and stitch me in. I have photos in 20 minutes. The casual racism was so effortless, it almost took my breath away almost. She assumed that because my grandmother worked hard to put my father through college by sewing clothes that I must exist to serve her too. She didn't see a CEO sitting in front of her. She saw help. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Carol," I said, my voice ice cold. "My billing rate is $5,000 an hour, and I do not do zippers." Carol whipped around her face, turning that dangerous shade of purple again. "Are you kidding me? Sophia? This is my wedding day. You are going to sit there and watch me fall apart because you are too petty to lift a finger, you selfish, ungrateful little—" "Hey, do not talk to my mother like that." Julian appeared from the hallway looking hungover and aggressive. He was wearing a tracksuit and looking for a fight. He saw his mother distressed. He saw me sitting comfortably and his fragile ego snapped. "She asked you for help," Julian shouted, storming over. He was trying to be the man of the house, trying to prove his worth after I humiliated him yesterday. "Fix the damn dress, Sophia. Stop acting like you are better than us." I stood up then, smoothing down the lapels of my blazer. "I am not acting, Julian." I started to walk away, tired of their drama. He didn't let me. He reached out and grabbed my arm, hard, shoving me back toward the chair. It wasn't a playful push. It was violent, hysterical aggression. I stumbled my heel, catching on the rug, and I fell back against the wall, hitting my shoulder against the wainscoting. The lobby went silent. The housekeeper gasped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply stood up straight, brushing the dust off my sleeve. Then I looked at my wrist. My watch had scraped against the wall. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus customized with a diamond bezel. It was worth $80,000 more than Julian would make in 3 years of his miserable influencer career. I looked at the watch, then I looked at Julian, checking for scratches calmly. "You just made a very expensive mistake, Julian," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I held up my wrist so he could see the glint of diamonds. "This is an assault, and you just damaged property that is worth more than your mother's car. My lawyer is in the restaurant finishing his breakfast. He is going to love this." Julian paled, stepping back. He looked at his hand like it had betrayed him. He knew he had crossed a line. He knew he couldn't bully his way out of a lawsuit. "Sophia, wait." Carol started, her voice trembling. Not with apology, but with fear of consequences. "We are all just stressed. Let us not bring lawyers into this." I was about to end them right there. I was about to call security and have Julian arrested for battery. But then a sound cut through the tension. Ping, it was Carol's phone, clutched in her sweaty hand. It was a distinctive notification sound, the one she had set for high-priority emails. She looked down at the screen, distracted momentarily. Then her eyes went wider than I had ever seen them. Her jaw dropped. "Oh my God," Carol whispered, the broken zipper forgotten. She looked up at Julian, tears of joy suddenly springing to her eyes, accusing me, forgotten. "Oh my God, Julian, look!" "What?" Julian asked, looking nervous, watching me. "It is them!" Carol shrieked, jumping up and down, holding the dress up to her chest. "It is Obsidian Ventures. They just emailed me, personally. They are here, Sophia. They are actually here." She read the email out loud, her voice shaking with ecstasy. "Dear Ms. Miller, our senior partners are currently at the Harbor View Hotel. We have reviewed your proposal and are prepared to move forward with the $4.7 million investment immediately. We would like to meet you in the Sapphire Conference Room in 30 minutes to sign the papers." Carol let out a scream of victory. She turned to me, her earlier panic replaced by smug superiority. "Did you hear that, Sophia? $4.7 million? She laughed, waving the phone in my face. "You are talking about lawsuits over a watch while I am closing multi-million-dollar deals. This is why you will never be on my level." She grabbed Julian's arm, beaming. "Come on, baby. We need to get this dress fixed with safety pins or duct tape. I do not care. We are going to be rich." She ran toward the elevators, dragging Julian with her, completely forgetting that she had just assaulted me. Completely. Forgetting that I was the one who had just sent that email from my phone, 5 seconds before Julian pushed me. I watched them go, a small smile playing on my lips. "Go ahead, Carol," I whispered, watching the elevator doors close. "Get your safety pins. Get your hopes up. Because when you walk into that conference room, you are not going to find a check. You are going to find me. And I am going to make sure that fall hurts." From the balcony of the presidential suite, the world looked small and manageable. Specifically the world of the Harborview Hotel, where my stepmother was currently running around like a woman possessed. I stood there with the ocean breeze tangling my hair, watching the transformation unfold below just as I knew it would. The email I had sent from the Obsidian Ventures server was not just a promise of money, it was gasoline, and Carol was the match. I had barely finished my second cup of coffee when the delivery trucks started arriving. Carol was not wasting a single second. She was operating on the assumption that the $4.7 million was already in her bank account, ignoring the fact that she had not signed a single piece of paper yet. But that is how people like Carol think. They believe they are entitled to the harvest before they have even planted the seeds. I watched as a florist van pulled up, and workers began unloading crates of white orchids imported from Thailand, presumably because the local hydrangeas were no longer good enough for a woman about to be a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I saw the catering manager running back and forth with a clipboard, looking both terrified and exhausted. Carol had clearly scrapped the chicken dinner option and replaced it with lobster tails and filet mignon. I could almost hear her voice screeching that nothing but the best would do for her new partners. But the most satisfying part wasn't watching the spending. It was knowing where the money was coming from. I went back inside the suite and opened my laptop. My father Marcus had listed me as a beneficiary on his life insurance policy years ago, and because of that our credit profiles were still linked in some obscure databases, giving me alerts whenever he made a major financial move. My screen was lighting up with notifications like a Christmas tree: credit inquiry, hard pull, second mortgage application. Carol had convinced him. She had spun a tale so intoxicating that my father, a man who used to clip coupons and lecture me about saving pennies, was currently signing away his entire future. He was leveraging his paid-off house in Ohio. He was draining his 401k, And he was taking out high-interest bridge loans from predatory lenders who charged 30% interest just to pay for this wedding upgrade. He was betting the farm on a horse that I had already shot. It was tragic, and it was hilarious. Around noon, my phone vibrated on the marble countertop. It was my father. I let it ring for a moment, contemplating whether I wanted to hear his voice, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear the hubris before the fall. I wanted a recording of his arrogance to play back to him when he came begging. Later, I picked up the phone, putting it on speaker while I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. "Hello, Dad." "Sophia," he answered, and his voice was different. Yesterday, he sounded beaten and small, but today he sounded like a man who had just conquered a kingdom. There was a swagger in his tone, a richness that hadn't been there before. "I hope you are not still sulking about the dress incident yesterday," Dad said, ignoring the fact that his stepson had assaulted me. "Look, I am calling because I have some incredible news. Carol just landed the deal of a lifetime. Obsidian Ventures is investing nearly $5 million into her company. We are going to be rich, Sophia. Generational wealth rich." I took a sip of water, letting the bubbles burst on my tongue. "That sounds wonderful, Dad," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Congratulations to Carol." "Yeah. Well, it proves I was right about her, doesn't it?" He let out a chuckle that sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "She has vision. You never understood that. You always looked down on her, thinking you were so smart with your little job and your savings account. But Carol is playing in the big leagues now. We are upgrading the entire wedding, champagne fountains, live orchestra, the works." "That must be expensive," I said, knowing exactly how expensive it was, because I owned the debt he was currently accruing. "Money makes money," Sophia, Dad said dismissively. "We are just fronting the cash. The investment wire will hit our account on Monday. It is just a formality, honestly. And listen, I was thinking about what happened with the guest list." He paused, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to ask if I could come now that they were supposedly rich enough to afford me. "You know," he continued, his voice taking on a fake, sympathetic tone, "doing you a favor by uninviting you. I really was. You would have been miserable here. Sophia, seriously. Look at you. You drive a Honda. You wear those plain suits. You count your pennies because you have to. And tonight, we are going to be celebrating with heavy hitters. People who talk about yachting and summer homes. You would have felt so small, so out of place. It would have been embarrassing for you to try and keep up." I tightened my grip on the glass. The glass didn't break, but my patience did. He wasn't just cruel, he was delusional. He was framing his rejection as an act of mercy, claiming he was protecting me from my own poverty, while he was the one drowning in debt he couldn't pay. "So you see, it is better this way," Dad said, sounding pleased with his own logic. "You can go back to San Francisco and live your life, and we will handle the burden of this new wealth. You do not have to worry about trying to fit in where you do not belong. We are just in different tax brackets now, sweetie." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the fresh ocean air that flowed through my $5,000 a night suite. He was right. We were in different tax brackets. Just not the way he thought. "You are right, Dad," I said quietly. My voice was calm, dangerously calm. "I really would not fit in at your table. Thank you for sparing me the embarrassment." "Good. I am glad you understand," Dad said, ready to hang up now that he had established his dominance. "Send us a nice gift. Okay? Something from the registry. Nothing. Homemade." "Bye, Sophia." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, watching the screen turn black. He had just dug his own grave and then called me to brag about the quality of the shovel. I walked over to the desk where the legal document sat waiting. The term sheet for the investment was right on top. It looked official, it looked promising, but underneath it was the document I had prepared with James earlier that morning. The rejection letter, and the foreclosure notice for the loans my holding company had just bought from his predatory lender. I picked up my phone and typed a text message to him. My thumbs moved quickly over the glass. Start of text message. Congratulations, Dad. I am truly happy that Carol found an investor who sees her true value. Enjoy the champagne tonight. I hope you read the contract as carefully as you read the guest list. End of text message. I hit send and watched the little bubble indicate that it had been delivered. Then I stood up and walked to the closet. I pushed aside the plain suits my father hated so much and pulled out the dress I had bought specifically for tomorrow. It was a white power suit tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut glass and expensive enough to buy his Honda Civic 3 times over. I wasn't going to the wedding to eat their lobster or drink their champagne. I was going there to sign the papers. And when I signed, I was going to make sure the ink was red. The Sapphire Conference Room was the most expensive meeting space in the hotel, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the harbor and soundproof walls that were designed to keep billion-dollar secrets safe. Unfortunately for Carol, those walls were not designed to keep out the woman who owned the mortgage on the building. I was sitting in the adjoining technical suite, a small windowless room, usually reserved for AV technicians wearing a pair of noise-canceling headphones connected directly to the microphone hidden in the floral centerpiece on the conference table next door. On the high-definition monitor in front of me, I watched Carol pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that I recognized from a runway collection 2 seasons ago, likely purchased on credit, and she was rehearsing her pitch to the empty air, checking her reflection in the glass every 3 seconds. She looked confident on the outside, but on the thermal camera feed I had running on my second screen, she was glowing red with anxiety. Sitting across from her was Michael, one of my sharpest junior associates. He was 26 years old, looked like he had just walked out of a GQ catalog, and possessed the acting skills of a seasoned diplomat. I had briefed him thoroughly. He knew exactly which buttons to push to make Carol unravel. I leaned forward, adjusting the volume as Michael cleared his throat, signaling that he was ready to begin, Ms. Miller. Michael said, his voice smooth and professional. Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice. The senior partners at Obsidian Ventures have been tracking prestige marketing for quite some time. Your growth trajectory is impressive. Carol sat down, smoothing her skirt, beaming at the compliment. Thank you. It has been a labor of love. We have positioned ourselves as the premier agency for luxury lifestyle brands. The market response has been overwhelming. Honestly, we are turning away clients because we just do not have the capacity. That is why this capital injection is so critical. I watched on the screen as Michael opened the folder in front of him. It contained the fake due diligence report I had prepared. He pretended to study the numbers, nodding thoughtfully. The revenue projections here are aggressive, Michael noted. You are forecasting a 300% increase in Q4. Can you walk me through the underlying assets supporting this growth, specifically the liquidity ratios? Carol didn't even blink. Oh, absolutely. She leaned in, lowering her voice confidentially. We have secured exclusive contracts with 3 major tech firms in Silicon Valley. The paperwork is just being finalized, but the verbal agreements are rock solid. That revenue is practically in the bank. The liquidity issue on the balance sheet is just a temporary reflection of our aggressive reinvestment strategy. We are pouring everything back into the company. Liar, I whispered to the empty room. I checked the real financial report on my tablet. Those tech firms, she mentioned, had sent cease and desist letters to her company last week for unauthorized use of their logos. She didn't have contracts, she had lawsuits pending, and the reinvestment strategy was actually her siphoning company, funds to pay for her personal lifestyle, including the deposit on this very wedding. Michael nodded, looking impressed. Bold strategy. I like it. Obsidian Ventures appreciates founders who are willing to take risks. Now regarding the ownership structure. I see that your husband Marcus Brooks is listed as a co-founder and holds a 40% equity stake. How involved is he in the daily operations? Will he need to be present for the signing? This was the trap. I held my breath, waiting to hear how she would describe the man she was marrying tomorrow. Carol laughed, a dismissive, high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Marcus!" She waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Do not worry about him. He is listed on the paperwork purely for optical reasons. You know how it is in this political climate. Having a minority co-founder opens doors for certain government grants and diversity quotas. It is a box we had to check." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. She was reducing my father, the man who had worked 40 years in human resources fighting for equal opportunity, to a diversity quota. A token. "So he does not have decision-making power?" Michael asked, pressing gently. "None," Carol said firmly, taking a sip of water. "Look, let us be honest here, Michael. Marcus is a sweet man, but he is simple. He is an older black man who is frankly just happy to have a younger white woman on his arm. He does what I say. He signs whatever I put in front of him. He is the face when we need a face. But I am the brain. I run this show. He is just along for the ride. And honestly, he is lucky to be here." I closed my eyes, letting the recording software capture every syllable of her betrayal. She wasn't just stealing his money. She was stealing his dignity. She viewed him as a prop, a pet, a useful idiot to help her get ahead. And the worst part was, she was right. He had made himself malleable. He had allowed her to strip him of his pride for the sake of her approval. Michael paused for a moment, and I could tell he was genuinely disgusted. But he stayed in character. "That is good to know, Ms. Miller. We prefer dealing with a singular vision. It makes the execution of our strategy much more efficient." He closed the folder and clasped his hands, together. "Well, I have seen enough. The numbers look creative, but the potential is undeniable. Obsidian Ventures is ready to move forward." Carol let out a breath she had been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Oh, thank God. You will not regret this, Michael. We are going to make a lot of money together. Do you have the check?" Michael smiled, a shark-like grin that matched my own mood perfectly. "Not on me, Ms. Miller. A deal of this magnitude requires a certain level of ceremony. My managing partner, the head of the firm, insists on signing the final agreement personally." Carol looked confused but eager. "Of course, when can I meet him? Is he here?" Her Michael corrected, watching her face closely. "The managing partner is a woman, and she wants to make a splash. She wants to do the signing publicly to show our full support for your brand. She wants to do it tomorrow during your wedding reception, right before the toasts." Carol's eyes lit up with greed. She was imagining the photo op, the envy of her friends, the ultimate validation of her classy wedding. "That sounds amazing," Carol gushed. "A public signing at the wedding. It is perfect. It is exactly the kind of PR we need. Who is she? What is her name? I want to make sure she has the best seat in the house." Michael stood up, extending his hand, ignoring her question. "You will meet her tomorrow, Ms. Miller. She prefers to make a grand entrance. Just make sure the microphone is ready and the spotlight is on. She hates to be kept waiting." Carol shook his hand vigorously, practically vibrating with excitement. "I will, I promise. Tell her it will be the most sophisticated event of the year. She is going to love it." I watched as Michael walked out of the room, leaving Carol alone. She immediately grabbed her phone, probably to call my father, and tell him another lie about how brilliant she was. She did not know that the woman she was so eager to impress was the same woman she had called a stalker in the lobby. I took off the headphones and saved the audio file, uploading it to the cloud backup named Project Karma. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the tent being set up on the lawn below. "Enjoy your victory lap, Carol," I whispered, touching the cold glass. "Because tomorrow when that spotlight hits me, you are going to wish you had stayed in the dark." The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon on the Great Lawn, a sprawling expanse of green overlooking the Edgartown Harbor. Carol had spent the entire morning screaming at the florists because the shade of the hydrangeas was apparently too aggressive. But by 3 o'clock, the venue looked exactly like the fantasy she had sold to my father. It was picture perfect, pristine, and completely financed by debt. I spent the morning in my suite preparing for war. I didn't dress like a guest, I dressed like a conqueror. I chose a white Yves Saint Laurent tuxedo suit, tailored to within an inch of its life. It was a bold move wearing white to a wedding, but considering I was paying for the champagne the bride was about to drink, I figured I had earned the right to break a few rules. I took the elevator down to the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The hotel was buzzing with guests arriving for the Miller Brooks wedding. Most of them were Carol's business associates, people who looked expensive but smelled like desperation trying to network their way into a higher tax bracket. I walked out the back doors toward the lawn where a security checkpoint had been set up specifically for me. Carol had hired 2 private security guards, massive men in black suits who looked like they usually bounced at nightclubs, to stand at the entrance of the garden path. She had given them my photo. I knew this because I had seen Julian printing copies of my LinkedIn profile picture in the business center earlier that morning. As I approached the checkpoint, one of the guards stepped forward, blocking my path, his hand raised in a stop motion. "Name the guard grunted, not bothering to look me in the eye. "Sophia Brooks," I said calmly, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. The guard looked at a clipboard, then at the crumpled photo taped to the podium. He smirked, looking me up and down. "Yeah, you are on the do not admit list. The bride gave us strict instructions. You need to leave the property immediately, Ms. Brooks, or we will have to escort you out forcibly." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," I said softly, reaching into my purse. "I am not here as a guest of the bride. I am here as the owner of the venue." The guard laughed, a short barking sound. "Yeah, and I am the King of England. Beat it, lady, before I call the cops." "Actually," I said, pulling out a gold laminated card with the Harbor View Hotel insignia and the words "Majority Shareholder" embossed on the front. "I think you should call the general manager, Henry Sterling. Ask him who signs his paychecks. Ask him whose signature is on the deed to the holding company that acquired this property 3 days ago." The guard stopped laughing. He looked at the card, then he looked at my face, waiting for me to crack. But I didn't. I just stared at him with the absolute certainty of a woman who knows exactly what she owns. He tapped his earpiece, looking nervous. "Base, this is Unit 1. I have a Sophia Brooks here claiming she owns the place. Can you verify over?" There was a long pause of static. Then Henry's voice came through the earpiece, loud enough for me to hear it clearly. "Jesus Christ, let her in. That is the boss, you idiot. Let her in immediately." The guard's face went pale. He pulled the earpiece out slightly, looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He stepped aside quickly, almost tripping over his own feet to open the velvet rope. "I am so sorry, Ms. Brooks," he stammered. "I didn't know. The instructions were—" "You were doing your job," I said, stepping through the barrier. "But remember, for future reference, my face overrides any list Carol Miller gives you. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely enjoy the event." I walked past him onto the white runner that led toward the tent. I could hear the string quartet playing softly in the distance. But before I could make it to the main entrance, a shadow fell across my path. Well, 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 look who decided to show up where she is not wanted. It was Julian. He was wearing a tuxedo that was a size too small, making him look like a stuffed sausage. He was standing in the middle of the path, blocking my way, looking smug. He had his phone out, ready to record another humiliation I told you yesterday. "Sophia," Julian sneered, stepping closer to me. "You are not welcome here," Mom said. "If you showed up, I should handle it. So turn around and walk away before I make a scene that will ruin your little reputation." I stopped, looking at him with pity. He really thought he was the hero of this story. He really thought he could intimidate me. "Get out of my way, Julian," I said quietly. "I have a meeting to attend." "Make me." Julian challenged, puffing out his chest. He reached out to grab my arm just like he had in the lobby yesterday, looking for a physical confrontation, looking for a reason to claim I attacked him. But his hand never made contact. "Stop right there. Step away from her now." The command came from behind me, sharp and authoritative. Julian froze his hand, hovering in midair. He looked past me, and his smug expression shattered into a million pieces. Walking toward us was Officer Miller, a veteran of the Edgartown Police Department and a man I had known for years since I started summering on the island. He was in full uniform, his hand resting casually on his belt, and he did not look amused. "Officer Miller," Julian stammered, taking a step back. She is trespassing. My mother, Ms. Brooks, is not trespassing." Officer Miller said, his voice cutting through Julian's excuses like a knife. "But you, son, are in violation of a restraining order." "Restraining order," Julian squeaked, looking at me with wide eyes. "What are you talking about?" Officer Miller pulled a folded document from his pocket, giving Julian a hard stare. "An emergency order of protection was filed this morning regarding the assault that took place in the lobby yesterday. The judge signed it an hour ago. You are required to stay at least 50 feet away from Ms. Brooks at all times. You just violated that order by attempting to grab her." Julian looked like he was going to throw up. "But it was my mother's wedding. I have to be here. I am the best man." "That is not my problem," Officer Miller said, stepping between us. "You have two choices, son. You can back away right now and go sit quietly in the back row without making a sound. Or I can put you in cuffs and drag you out of here in front of all these nice people, causing the exact scene you accused Ms. Brooks of wanting to make." Julian looked at the tent where the guests were starting to take their seats. He looked at the officer, and then he looked at me. I raised my eyebrow, daring him to try it, daring him to ruin his mother's big day before I even got the chance to. "Fine," Julian whispered, his face burning with humiliation. He backed away, holding his hands up in surrender. "I am going. I am going." "Smart choice." "Officer?" Miller grunted, watching him scurry away like a rat finding a hole. Then he turned to me, tipping his cap politely. "Ms. Brooks, good to see you again. Let me know if he gives you any more trouble." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate the escort," I said, smoothing my jacket. "I think I can handle it from here." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of sea salt and victory. The path was clear now. Ahead of me, the white tent glowed in the afternoon sun. Inside, my father was waiting to give away his freedom, and Carol was waiting to claim a prize that didn't exist. I walked toward the entrance, the heavy double doors guarded by two more staff members, who bowed as I approached. They pushed the doors open and the sound of the string quartet swelled. I stepped into the light. My white suit caught the sun, reflecting it like a mirror. Every head in the room turned. The chatter stopped. The music faltered. I wasn't just a guest. I was the event. And the show was about to begin. The interior of the marquee tent was a blinding display of white silk and crystal chandeliers, suspended from the high canvas ceiling, creating a world that felt entirely removed from reality. It was freezing cold outside, thanks to the ocean breeze, but inside it was warm, scented with expensive gardenias and the heavy perfume of old money. I stood at the very back of the room near the entrance, hidden in the shadows of a massive floral arrangement, watching the scene unfold with the detached precision of a surgeon about to make the first incision. The guests were seated in rows of gold, chiavari chairs facing a raised stage where an altar had been set up. But this wasn't just a wedding altar, it looked more like a corporate presentation stage, complete with a podium and a microphone stand. My father, Marcus, was standing to the side, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked like a prop that had been placed there by a set designer and forgotten. But Carol was in her element. She stood at the podium, clutching the microphone like it was a scepter, radiating a manic energy that the guests probably mistook for bridal joy. She had fixed the zipper on her dress, or at least pinned it together under a fur shawl, and she was commanding the room with a terrifying confidence. I adjusted the lapels of my white Yves Saint Laurent suit and waited. The ceremony hadn't even started yet, but Carol had insisted on making a welcome speech, which I knew was code for a victory lap. She wanted to brag. She wanted to make sure everyone in this room knew that she had arrived. "Welcome, everyone," Carol boomed, her voice echoing through the high-quality sound system she had rented on credit. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous day. It is not just a celebration of love between Marcus and myself, but a celebration of excellence. Looking around this room, I see captains of industry, I see visionaries, and I see the kind of high-caliber network that defines success." She paused for applause, and the guests politely clapped their hands, oblivious to the fact that the woman speaking to them was technically insolvent. "You know," Carol continued, her voice softening into a fake theatrical sincerity, "when I started Prestige Marketing Group, I had a vision. I wanted to bring class back to the world. I wanted to elevate standards. And finding a partner who shares that vision was difficult. It is hard to find people who understand that image is everything." She turned to look at my father, and for a second I thought she might actually say something kind, something about his loyalty or his patience. "But Carol did not speak the language of kindness, Marcus," she said, gesturing to him with a wave of her hand. "You have been a surprising partner on this journey. We come from such different worlds, do not we? Everyone said it wouldn't work. A woman like me with my background and drive, and a man like you from humbler beginnings. But we proved them wrong. We showed them that with enough guidance and refinement, anyone can be elevated." A ripple of awkward silence moved through the crowd. I saw a few guests exchange glances. This wasn't a toast. It was a public performance of her savior complex. She was congratulating herself for marrying a black man, as if it were a charitable act. "And I want to thank you, Marcus," Carol went on, her voice dripping with condescension, "for trusting me, for letting me mold our life into something sophisticated, for bringing me a family that is, finally, perfect." She took a deep breath and looked directly at the front row where Julian was sitting, looking sullen and defeated after his run-in with the police. Then she looked back at Marcus and said the words that sealed her fate. "Thank you, Marcus, for giving me a blank slate. A family that is curated. A family free of the baggage and the low-class elements that usually drag people like us down. Thank you for understanding that in order to soar, sometimes you have to cut the dead weight." I felt the air leave my lungs, not from pain, but from the sheer audacity of it. She was talking about me. She was standing in front of 200 people calling her stepdaughter, dead weight, and low-class elements, while spending the money I would eventually inherit. She was gloating about erasing me from the picture, believing that her cruelty was actually a virtue. My father looked down at his shoes, unable to meet the eyes of the crowd. He knew exactly what she meant. And he said nothing. He let her insult his flesh and blood to preserve the peace, to keep the aesthetic intact. Carol turned back to the audience, her face glowing with triumph. But enough about the past, she announced, her energy shifting again, becoming sharp and predatory. "Today is about the future, and I have a surprise announcement that is going to change everything for us, for Prestige Marketing, and for everyone in this room who values success." She signaled to the back of the room where the lighting technician was waiting. "Many of you know that I have been in high-level negotiations this week," Carol said, her voice trembling with excitement. "And I am thrilled to announce that we have secured a historic partnership. The ink is about to dry on a deal that will launch us into the stratosphere." She looked out at the sea of faces, savoring the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the managing partner of Obsidian Ventures, the visionary firm that has just pledged $4.7 million to the future of Prestige Marketing. She has flown here privately just to stand with us today and sign the check that will make all of our dreams come true." The crowd murmured with interest. People sat up straighter. Money always got their attention. Carol pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the room, right toward the entrance where I was standing. Please welcome our new partner and savior, Carol shouted. The spotlight is yours. The room went dark for a split second, and then a massive beam of white light cut through the gloom. It swung across the ceiling, searching for the target. Carol was beaming, looking toward the entrance, expecting a stranger, expecting a check, expecting salvation. The spotlight hit me. It blinded me for a second, turning the world into a haze of white light. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shield my eyes. I stepped forward into the beam, my white suit glowing like armor against the darkness. I heard the gasp start from the front row and ripple backward like a wave. It started with Julian, who let out a choked sound of horror. It moved to my father, whose head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief, and finally it reached the stage. Carol froze. Her hand was still raised in the air, pointing at me. Her smile was frozen in place. A rictus of joy that was slowly cracking as her brain tried to process what she was seeing. She was expecting a savior. Instead, she was looking at the low-class element she had tried to erase. I took a step forward, my heels sinking slightly into the white runner. I adjusted the microphone on my lapel, the one I had brought with me, connected to the hotel's PA system, thanks to a generous tip to the sound engineer earlier that day. I walked down the aisle, the crowd parting slightly, their eyes glued to me. They didn't know who I was yet, but they knew drama when they saw it, and Carol, standing on stage looking like she had seen a ghost, was the definition of drama. I stopped in the middle of the room, right in the center of the spotlight. I looked up at the stage meeting, Carol's terrified gaze across the distance. Hello, Carol, I said, my voice booming through the speakers, clear and calm, interrupting her perfect moment. I believe you were looking for the managing partner of Obsidian Ventures. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out a gold pen, clicking it open with one hand. I am here to sign the check, I said, smiling. But first we need to talk about those low-class elements you mentioned. The silence in the tent was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging above our heads. It was a physical weight, pressing down on every single person in the room. As I walked down the aisle, the only sound was the rhythmic click of my heels on the white runner, a sound that echoed like a ticking clock, counting down to Carol's destruction. The spotlight followed me, tracking my every move, turning my white suit into a beacon of blinding brilliance. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me. These were the people my father was so desperate to impress. Bankers, the investors, the socialites who judged worth by the label on your handbag. They were staring at me now, not with disdain, but with confusion and curiosity. They saw a woman walking with the confidence of a predator. They saw the security guards stepping aside. They saw the fear on the bride's face, and they knew that something unscripted, something dangerous, was about to happen. I reached the stairs leading up to the stage and paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough to make eye contact with my father. Marcus looked like he was having a cardiac event. His skin had turned an ashy shade of gray, and he was gripping his champagne flute so hard I thought it might shatter in his hand. He looked from me to Carol and back again, his eyes begging me to stop, begging me to disappear, to go back to being the invisible daughter who paid his bills from the shadows. But it was too late for that. I ascended the stairs, slowly, deliberately, taking my place at the podium. The stage was bright hot and smelled of Carol's expensive perfume mixed with the sour scent of her panic. She was standing just 2 feet away from me, her chest heaving beneath her corset. "What are you doing here?" Carol hissed, her voice a strangled whisper that the microphone barely missed picking up. "Get off this stage immediately. You are ruining everything. I am in the middle of introducing a multi-million-dollar investor. You need to leave before I have you dragged out by your hair." I turned to look at her, keeping my expression perfectly neutral, the mask of the professional completely intact. "You invited the investor." "Carol," I said calmly, my voice low enough that only she and Marcus could hear. "I am just answering the call." She stared at me, blinking rapidly as if her brain was short-circuiting. What are you talking about? You are delusional. Get out, Sophia, I mean it. Get out now. She reached out to grab the microphone, trying to block me from speaking, trying to regain control of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. But I was faster. I stepped smoothly to the side, putting the podium between us. I looked out at the audience, taking in the sea of expectant faces. They were waiting for the managing partner of Obsidian Ventures. They were waiting for the money, and I was not going to keep them waiting. I leaned into the microphone, letting my voice fill the cavernous space, smooth and authoritative. Good afternoon, everyone! My voice boomed through the speakers, crisp and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. I apologized for the dramatic entrance. I continued making eye contact with the front row, where Julian was currently trying to shrink into his chair. But when one is invited to a wedding of this magnitude, one wants to make sure the entrance matches the aesthetic. Isn't that right, Carol? I turned to look at her. She was frozen, her mouth slightly open. Her hands still reached out in that aborted grabbing motion. She looked like a statue of desperation. The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure if this was part of the show or a family breakdown happening in real time. They were captivated. You see, I went on, getting straight to the point. Mrs. Miller here has been telling you all about the bright future of prestige marketing. She has been telling you about the vision, the class, the sophistication. She has been telling you that she secured a partnership that will change everything. I paused, letting the silence stretch again until it was almost unbearable. And she is right, I said. She did secure a meeting. She did pitch her company, and she was promised that the managing partner of Obsidian Ventures would be here today to sign the check personally. Carol took a step toward me, her eyes wide with confusion and rising horror. She looked at the door again, expecting someone else to walk through, expecting the real investor to arrive and save her from me. Who are you waiting for? Carol, I asked, my voice hardening, dropping the pleasantries. The check writer is on stage. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the leather-bound portfolio containing the contracts. I slapped it down on the podium with a thud that echoed through the room. My name is Sophia Brooks. The name hung in the air, familiar yet foreign in this context. And I am the managing partner of Obsidian Ventures. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. It started as a ripple, a collective gasp that moved through the room like a shockwave. I saw heads turning, whispers erupting, hands covering mouths. The guests looked from me to Carol, trying to reconcile the image of the low-class stepdaughter with the reality of the woman who held the purse strings. But the most satisfying reaction happened right next to me. Crash! The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. My father Marcus had finally lost his grip. The champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers and smashed against the hardwood stage, sending shards of crystal and sparkling wine flying across Carol's dress. He didn't even notice. He was staring at me with a look of absolute devastation. It was the look of a man realizing that the daughter he had thrown away was the very person he had been praying to for salvation. He realized in that split second that every time he had called me poor, every time he had belittled my career, every time he had chosen Carol over me, he had been mocking the hand that fed him. Carol made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a choke. She staggered back, clutching the podium for support, staring at me as if I had grown a second head. No, she whispered loudly enough for the front row to hear. That is impossible. You drive a Honda. You live in an apartment. You are nobody. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that had no warmth in it. I am the person who owns 40% of the tech startups in Silicon Valley. Carolyn, I said, speaking into the microphone so everyone could hear the resume. She had ignored. I am the person who just bought this hotel 3 days ago, so that I could ensure my stay was comfortable. And most importantly, I am the person who spent the last week reviewing your financial records, your fraudulent tax returns, and your desperate emails begging for capital. The crowd was silent now, deadly silent. You could hear a pin drop. The investors in the room, the real ones, were leaning forward, listening intently, smelling blood in the water. You called me a liability. Carol? I continued, my voice steady, relentless. You told my father that I was dead weight. You told this entire room that you needed to cut out the low-class elements to succeed. I picked up the portfolio and held it up. Well, here I am, the low-class element, and I am holding the $4.7 million. You need to stay out of prison. Carol's knees gave out. She actually collapsed, sinking to the floor in her ruined wedding dress surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, mascara running in black streaks ruining her perfect aesthetic. Please, she mouthed silent words of begging. Please, Sophia, Dawn, not. I looked down at her feeling nothing but a profound sense of closure. I opened the portfolio, revealing the documents inside. I told you I was coming to sign the papers, Carol, I said into the microphone. And I am a woman of my word. But I think you and everyone else in this room should know exactly what I am declining to sign today. I turned the page, preparing to read the list of her financial crimes to the audience, preparing to deliver the final blow that would end her career forever. The spotlight felt warm on my face. The truth was finally out, and it was absolutely classy. The projection screen behind me, which was supposed to be displaying a montage of Carol and Marcus. Romantic vacation photos flickered once before turning a stark, unforgiving blue. I had the remote control in my hand, the ultimate clicker that would change the channel from their fantasy wedding to a true crime documentary. I gestured to the screen casually, as if I were leading a boardroom presentation, rather than a public execution. You see, ladies and gentlemen? I said, my voice smooth and practiced. When Mrs. Miller applied for funding, she assumed that we would simply look at the polished PowerPoint slides she prepared. She assumed we wouldn't look under the hood. But at Obsidian Ventures, we have a saying. The truth is in the ledger. I pressed the button. The screen filled with a spreadsheet highlighting rows of red ink. It was a forensic accounting of Prestige Marketing Group. What you are looking at is not a thriving business, I explained, walking around the podium to stand directly above where Carol lay crumpled on the floor. This is a Ponzi scheme built on credit card debt and unpaid payroll. I pointed to the highlighted columns specifically. These are the wages of your 3 graphic designers. Carol, I said, looking down at her. They haven't been paid in 2 months because you used the payroll account to put a down payment on this venue. You stole from your own employees to pay for flowers. A gasp went through the room. The wealthy guests who prided themselves on their business ethics looked at each other in horror. But I wasn't done. I clicked the button again. A new document appeared. It was an email thread between Carol and her accountant. And this, I continued, is evidence of tax fraud, specifically the hiding of assets during her previous divorce proceedings, and the falsification of revenue to secure government grants intended for minority-owned businesses. I looked at the audience, shaking my head slightly. She used my father's name to qualify for grants meant to help struggling Black entrepreneurs while calling him useless behind his back. Speaking of which, I paused, letting the weight of the next moment settle. It was the kill shot, the evidence that would destroy not just her business but her marriage. We had a very interesting meeting yesterday, Carol, I said, addressing her directly. You thought you were speaking to a junior associate, but you were speaking to my microphone, and I think my father deserves to hear exactly how much you respect him. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the concert-quality speakers. Carol's voice rang out shrill and mocking. He is simple. He is an older Black man who is frankly just happy to have a younger white woman on his arm. He does what I say. He signs whatever I put in front of him. He is the face. When we need a face, but I am the brain. He is just a diversity quota. The recording ended, leaving a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the tent. I looked at my father. He was standing motionless. His face, drained of all color, looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The glass he had dropped earlier lay at his feet, but the pieces of his dignity were scattered even further. He looked at Carol, the woman he had alienated his daughter for the woman he had gone into debt for, and for the first time he saw her clearly. He saw the monster behind the makeup. Carol was sobbing now, curled into a ball, trying to cover her ears, as if she could block out her own voice. But there was nowhere to hide. I looked back at the audience, closing the portfolio. Obsidian. Ventures has a strict morality clause in all of our investment agreements. I said, my voice ringing with finality. We do not partner with fraudsters, we do not partner with racists, and we certainly do not partner with people who abuse the trust of their family. I picked up the document that mattered the most. The term sheet. The contract that promised $4.7 million. The paper that Carol had believed was her ticket to the high life. I held it up, letting it catch the spotlight just like Carol had held up my $10,000 check 2 days ago. You told me that my money wasn't good enough, Carol, I said. You told me that my savings couldn't buy class. You ripped up my gift and laughed in my face because you thought you were better than me. I took the thick, expensive paper between my hands. Well, this piece of paper is worth $4.7 million. It is the difference between your freedom and a federal prison cell. It is the only thing standing between you and total ruin. I looked her dead in the eye, and I am declining the deal. I ripped the contract in half. The sound was loud, violent, and incredibly satisfying. It echoed the sound of her ripping my check. But the stakes were astronomical compared to her petty cruelty. I didn't stop there. I put the halves together and ripped them again and again, shredding the multi-million-dollar deal into worthless confetti. Just as she had done to my offering, I walked to the edge of the stage and threw the pieces into the air. They fluttered down, snowing over Carol's sobbing form, settling on her ruined dress and her fake hair. I looked at my father one last time. He was weeping openly now, silently, tears tracking through the shock on his face. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out as if he wanted to touch the hem of my suit, as if he wanted forgiveness. Sophia, he whispered, his voice broken. I didn't answer him. I turned back to the microphone, delivering the final lesson, the one they would remember for the rest of their miserable lives. You uninvited me because you wanted to keep it classy, I said, my voice cold as steel. I gestured to the wreckage of their wedding. The crying bride, the broken groom, the stunned guests, and the shredded money covering the floor. Well, here is a lesson in class, Carol. Never bite the hand that was planning to feed you. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, signaling the end of the show. I turned and walked down the stairs, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. The spotlight tried to follow me, but I walked out of it, disappearing back into the confidence of the shadows, leaving them to face the darkness alone. The silence that followed my exit did not last long. In fact, it was broken less than 30 seconds later, by a sound that was far more terrifying than any scream. It was the sound of a notification. Specifically, the sharp ping of a wire transfer, failing, followed immediately by the ringing of a cell phone. Then another, then a dozen. The tent, which had been a sanctuary of silence just moments ago, suddenly erupted into a cacophony of digital urgency. I was not in the room to see it personally, but my associate Michael was still standing in the technical booth watching the chaos unfold on the monitors, reporting every delicious detail back to me. As I walked toward my car, the live stream of the event was still running, and the audience wasn't just the guests in the room. It was the creditors, the predatory lenders. The bank loan officers Carol had stalled for weeks, promising them that big payday was coming. They were all watching, and they had just watched their collateral walk out the door. Elena, the head wedding planner, who had spent the last 6 months tolerating Carol's abuse and impossible demands, was the first to strike. She stepped out from the shadows, her face pale but determined. She was holding a tablet that was glowing red with declined transaction alerts. She signaled to the catering staff, And in a move of absolute professional ruthlessness, the servers stopped pouring the champagne. Mid-glass. The waitstaff who were holding trays of lobster and caviar turned on their heels and marched back toward the kitchen. Carol scrambled to her feet, stumbling over the layers of her ruined dress. She looked around wildly, realizing the atmosphere had shifted from shock to hostility. She grabbed Elena by the arm, her nails digging into the woman's blazer. "Where are they going?" Carol shrieked hysteria, rising in her voice. "We have guests. Serve the food. Do not you dare embarrass me." Elena pulled her arm away with a look of pure disgust. "Mrs. Miller, the credit card on file, just declined for the final installment of $50,000, plus the overages for the rush upgrades you ordered yesterday. My contract states clearly that if payment is not secured prior to the reception, all services are suspended immediately." "Charge it again!" Carol screamed, desperate and frantic. "It is a mistake. It is the bank blocking it for fraud protection because it is a large amount. Just run it again. I have run it 4 times." Elena said, her voice cold and loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "It is not a fraud alert, Mrs. Miller. It is insufficient funds, and frankly, considering what we just heard from Ms. Brooks, I am not inclined to extend you any credit. The police are on their way to secure the venue assets. You need to pay the outstanding balance of $500,000 right now, or we are locking the doors." $500,000. The number hung in the air, a death sentence. Carol spun around, her eyes darting frantically until they landed on the only person left she could exploit. Marcus. My father was standing by the stage, looking like a man who had survived a bomb blast, only to realize he was bleeding out. He was staring at the confetti on the floor, the shredded remains of the Obsidian Ventures deal, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just done. Carol lunged at him, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo and shaking him violently. "Marcus, pay her!" Carol screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "Give her your card, right now. Give her the retirement account access. Transfer the money. We have to fix this." Marcus blinked, looking at her as if he didn't recognize her. "Carol, honey, I do not have that kind of money, Liquid. You know that. We used my savings for the deposit." "Liquidate it then." Carol yelled, pushing him back violently, calling him useless. "Get on the phone with your broker. Sell the portfolio. Sell the house in Ohio. I do not care. Just get me the money. You are my husband, Marcus. You are supposed to provide for me. Fix this." Marcus fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it onto the grass. He opened his banking app, expecting to see the safety net he had built over 40 years of labor, expecting to see the numbers that gave him a sense of worth. But as the screen loaded, the reality of his financial situation hit him with the force of a physical blow. 0. Actually, it was worse than 0. The balance was negative, pending overdraft fees for the wire transfers he had authorized just that morning to cover Carol's frantic last-minute demands for imported orchids and a custom dance floor. "Carol," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It is gone. Account is empty. We spent it all on the vendors who are walking out right now." Carol stared at him, and for the first time since I had known her, the mask slipped completely. There was no feigned affection, no manipulative sweetness, just the raw, ugly face of a narcissist who had lost her supply. "You useless old man!" Carol spat the words out, venomous and cruel. "I married you for stability. I married you because you were supposed to be safe. You were supposed to have assets, and you are standing there telling me you are broke. I gave you everything." Marcus said, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. "I gave you my pension. I gave you my dignity. I uninvited my own daughter for you. And look where that got us." Carol screamed, gesturing to the empty tables where guests were now grabbing their purses and fleeing the scene, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. You let her destroy me. You let that little brat walk in here and ruin my life, and you did nothing. You are weak, Marcus. You. Weak, pathetic man, and you are worth less to me than the dirt on my shoe. The guests were scrambling for the exits now. The captains of industry, Carol had bragged about, were checking their phones, calling their lawyers, ensuring they had no exposure to Prestige Marketing Group. Julian was nowhere to be seen, having fled the moment the police were mentioned, abandoning his mother to face the music alone. Elena, the wedding planner, stepped forward again, 2 security guards flanking her. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, if payment is not rendered in the next 5 minutes, we will be pressing charges for theft of services. This is a felony amount. Carol turned on Marcus again, her eyes wild with panic. Do something! Call her! Call Sophia back. Beg her. Get down on your knees if you have to. She is your daughter. She has the money. Make her come back. Marcus looked at his wife, looking at the woman who had demanded he cut ties with his only child, the woman who had isolated him from his family, his history, and his self, and his respect. He looked at the phone in his hand where my number was blocked per Carol's instructions. She is not coming back, Marcus said quietly, the realization finally settling in his bones. She is gone, Carol, and she took the checkbook with her. You have to do something, Carol shrieked, clawing at his chest. Do not just stand there, you idiot! Marcus looked down at her hands, scratching at his tuxedo, and slowly, deliberately, he reached up and peeled her fingers off him. He pushed her away, not violently, but with a finality that silenced her for a second. I have nothing left, Marcus said, his voice hollow. Dead. I have no money. I have no house. I have no daughter. And as of right now, I have no wife. He reached up and unpinned the boutonniere from his lapel, the white rose that Carol had selected because it matched her aesthetic. He dropped it onto the grass where it was immediately crushed by the boot of a security guard, stepping forward to detain them. You are on your own, Carol, Marcus said, turning his back. On her as the police lights began to flash against the canvas walls of the tent. Red and blue lights washing over the wreckage of the wedding. I sat in my car watching the live stream on my phone as the feed cut out, right as the officers stepped onto the stage. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just turned off the phone and told the driver to take me to the airport. The debt had been collected, and the balance was finally 0. The walk from the tent to the valet parking area was the longest walk of my life. Not because of the distance, but because of the heavy silence that surrounded me. I could still hear the commotion fading behind me, the shouting of the caterers, the sobbing of the bride, and the frantic murmurs of the guests fleeing the scene. But ahead of me lay the open road and a future that finally belonged entirely to me. I had signaled my driver moments before leaving the stage, and I could see the sleek black silhouette of the Rolls-Royce Phantom pulling up to the curb. It was a car that screamed power. A car that cost more than the house I grew up in, and it was the perfect vessel for my departure. I adjusted my white jacket, feeling the cool ocean breeze on my face, ready to leave the toxicity of the Miller Brooks wedding behind forever. But just as I reached for the door handle, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. Heavy, desperate footsteps running with a frantic urgency that I recognized immediately. Sophia, wait. Sophia, please stop. I froze my hand, hovering over the chrome handle. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I did not turn around immediately. I let him run. I let him exert himself. I let him feel the physical toll of chasing after the daughter he had spent 30 years running away from Sophia. My father, Marcus, crashed into the space behind me, panting heavily. He sounded like a man drowning, gasping for air, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of his world inside that tent. I turned slowly, pivoting on my heel to face him. He looked ruined. The man who had stood so proudly in his tuxedo just an hour ago, lecturing me about fitting in, was gone. In his place was a shell. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck. His jacket was wrinkled where Carol had grabbed him. His eyes, usually so guarded and critical, were wide with terror and rimmed with red. I stood there perfectly still, perfectly composed, looking at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist, observing a specimen under a microscope. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. I did not call him Dad. That title had been revoked the moment he let his wife tear up my check. Marcus stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked at the Rolls-Royce behind me, then back at my face, trying to reconcile the reality in front of him with the lie he had been living. "Sophia, baby, please," he stammered, taking a step toward me, his hands reaching out. He looked like he wanted to hug me, but he stopped when he saw the look in my eyes. He saw the wall I had built. A wall made of years of neglect and final betrayal. "You have to help us, Sophia." He choked out the words, tumbling over each other. "You cannot just leave like this. You cannot just destroy everything and walk away. We are family." I laughed, a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. "Family," I repeated, looking around the empty parking lot. "Is that what we are? Because yesterday when I offered to pay for your dinner, I was an embarrassment. Yesterday when I tried to fix a dress, I was a servant. And this morning when you uninvited me, I was a liability. So tell me, Marcus, when exactly did I become family again? Was it 5 minutes ago, when you realized I was the only person who could keep you out of bankruptcy court?" Marcus flinched as if I had slapped him. But then he did something I never expected. Something I had never seen him do in my entire life. He dropped to his knees. Right there in the dirt and the gravel of the hotel driveway, my father fell to his knees. He didn't care about his expensive suit. He didn't care about the valet drivers watching from a distance. He collapsed under the weight of his own regret. "Sophia, please," he begged, looking up at me, tears streaming down his face openly. Now I was wrong. Okay, I was wrong about everything. But you have to understand. She manipulated me, Carol. She got inside my head. She told me that this was the only way for us to move up in the world. She told me that if I listened to her, we would finally be respected. She made me do it, Sophia." I looked down at him, feeling a surge of disgust, harsher than anything I had felt for Carol. Carol was a predator. But Marcus, he was a coward. And cowards were always more dangerous because they let the predators in. "She made you." I asked, my voice quiet and lethal. "Did she hold a gun to your head when you dialed my number to uninvite me? Did she force your hand when you signed away your pension? Did she make you stand there in silence while she called your daughter low class in front of 200 people? Marcus sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "I was scared, Sophia. I was scared of losing her. I thought she loved me. I thought she was my chance at a better life. I didn't know she was a fraud. I didn't know she was using me." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," I said, cutting him off. "You were so desperate. You were so to be accepted by her world that you were willing to sacrifice your own flesh and blood to get a ticket. You traded me for a seat at a table where they never planned to serve you anyway. Sophia." "I am your father," he cried, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers, but I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "Blood is thicker than water, Sophia. You cannot let her go to prison. You cannot let me lose the house. That is your childhood home. We will be on the street. Please have mercy." "Mercy," I whispered, tasting the word. It was a beautiful concept, but mercy was for people who made mistakes, not for people who made choices. I looked down at the man kneeling in the dust, and I remembered being 7 years old, waiting for him to pick me up from school, rain soaking my clothes while he was at a dinner with a girlfriend. I remembered being 16, showing him my acceptance letter to Stanford, and him asking if I had applied to state school instead, because it was more realistic. I remembered yesterday standing in the lobby while he watched his stepson assault me and did nothing. I leaned down, getting close to his face so he could see the absolute finality in my eyes. You want to talk about blood, Marcus, I said softly. You want to talk about family? Well, let me tell you something about family. Family shows up. Family defends each other. Family does not look at their child as an aesthetic problem to be solved. Marcus whimpered his head, bowing low. You made a choice, I said, straightening up, towering over him. You chose class. You chose sophistication. You chose Carol. I signaled to the driver, who immediately stepped out and opened the heavy rear door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior smelled of leather and freedom. Sophia, do not do this! Marcus screamed, scrambling to get up, but stumbling back down. His strength gone. Do not leave me here. I have nothing. She took everything. I paused, one foot inside the car, looking back at him, one last time. You are right, I said. You have nothing. But that is not my fault. You spent your whole life trying to buy entry into a club that didn't want you, and the price of admission was me. I looked him dead in the eye, delivering the verdict he had earned. You uninvited me from your life, Dad, so you could keep it classy. You wanted a life without me. Well, you got it. I pointed to the empty driveway, the looming hotel, and the police sirens that were getting louder in the distance. I am officially uninviting you from my bank account, from my pity, and from my future. I slid into the back seat of the car. The leather was cool against my skin. I looked at the driver, a stoic man who had seen enough corporate takedowns to know not to ask questions. Go, I said simply. The driver nodded and closed the door with a solid, heavy thud that sounded like the closing of a vault. The sound sealed me inside a bubble of silence and luxury, cutting off the sound of my father's sobbing. As the car pulled away, moving smoothly over the gravel, I didn't look back. I didn't need to see him kneeling there in the dust. I knew exactly what he looked like. He looked like a man who had sold his soul for a discount, and was finally realizing that the return policy had expired. The car accelerated, turning onto the main road, leaving the Harbor View Hotel behind, leaving Carol to the police and Marcus to his misery. I watched the scenery blur past the beautiful island landscape that had been the backdrop for my trauma, now becoming the scenery of my liberation. I reached into the center console and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. I took a sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. The wedding was over, but my life, my real life, was just beginning. Or so I thought, until my phone buzzed with a notification that made the driver slam on the brakes. The Rolls-Royce glided toward the private airfield, smoothly isolating me from the physical wreckage of the wedding, but the digital world was a different battlefield entirely. I knew Julian well enough to know that he wouldn't go down quietly. He was a creature of the internet, a man who believed that truth was malleable if you used the right filter and the right sad music. I opened my phone and there it was, trending on 3 different platforms. Julian had not wasted any time hiding in the hotel bathroom to record his masterpiece. He had posted a video titled, "The Truth About My Evil Billionaire Stepsister, Destroying My Mom's Wedding." I tapped play, watching with a detached fascination as Julian cried on camera. His eyes were red, his voice was breaking, and the editing was manipulative genius. He had cut clips of me walking down the aisle in my white suit, making me look arrogant and menacing, intercut with shots of Carol crying on the floor. He had edited the audio to remove his own insults and Carol's slurs, leaving only my final lines about uninviting them, making it sound like I was attacking a helpless family for being poor. She ruined us. Julian sobbed into the camera, wiping away a fake tear. She came in with her bodyguards and her money, and she laughed at us. She hates us because we are not rich like her. She physically assaulted me in the lobby yesterday and today. She destroyed my mother just for content. She is a monster, guys. Please share this. We need justice. The video already had 2 million views. The comments were flooding in, filled with misinformed rage. People were calling for my head, calling for a boycott of Obsidian Ventures, calling me a heartless elitist snake. For a normal person, this would be terrifying. It would be the kind of PR nightmare that ends careers. But I am not a normal person. And I had prepared for this exact moment before I even stepped foot on the island. I didn't respond to the comments. I didn't post a defensive statement. I simply opened the encrypted messaging app I used to communicate with my crisis management team back in San Francisco. Execute Phase 2, I typed. Phase 2 was simple. It was the nuclear option. I had obtained the raw security footage from the hotel lobby the moment Henry Sterling gave me ownership access. I had the unedited audio from the conference room. And I had a team of digital forensics experts ready to deploy the truth like a precision airstrike. 10 minutes later, the narrative shifted violently. My team released the full unedited security tape from the lobby. Incident, specifically the angle that showed Julian initiating the confrontation. It showed him screaming at me. It showed him grabbing my arm aggressively, and it showed him shoving me into the wall while I stood there with my hands at my sides. It was undeniable proof of assault. Then came the audio. We leaked the recording from the conference room where Carol called Marcus a diversity quota, and Julian laughed in the background, agreeing that his stepfather was a useless prop. We captioned it clearly, highlighting every slur, every insult, every moment of their greed. The internet does not forgive liars, and it certainly does not forgive men who hit women. I watched the tide turn in real time. The comments on Julian's video stopped being supportive and started becoming vicious. Users were tagging the brands that sponsored Julian's influencer lifestyle energy drink companies. Cheap, watch brands fast fashion. Labels demanding to know if they supported a woman beater. One by one, the dominoes fell. I watched as the energy drink company posted a public statement on Twitter. We are aware of the disturbing footage involving Julian Miller. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence and discrimination. We are terminating our partnership effective immediately. Then came the watch company. Then the clothing brand. Within an hour, Julian had lost every single stream of income he had. Every link in his bio went dead. Every discount code was deactivated. He was being canceled with the same ferocity he had tried to weaponize against me. I refreshed his page one last time. He was live streaming now, trying to do damage control, trying to explain that the footage was taken out of context. But he looked terrified. The comments were moving so fast he couldn't read them. All hateful messages calling him a fraud, a abuser, a leech. I saw him reading them. His face pale, his hands shaking. He was realizing that he hadn't just lost a wedding. He had lost his audience. He had lost the only thing that mattered to him, his relevance. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Julian. Please make it stop. I looked at the message, thinking about the way he had laughed when Carol ripped up my check, thinking about the way he had shoved me into the wall, thinking about the video he had just posted, trying to destroy my reputation. I didn't reply. I blocked his number, just like I had blocked his mother's. Then I sent one final message to my PR team: bury him. My team unleashed the final wave. A series of bot-verified reports flagging his account for hate speech and dangerous content, violent extremism due to the assault footage. The algorithms did the rest. I watched as Julian's profile picture turned gray. I watched as his follower count dropped to 0. I watched as the message "user not found" appeared on the screen. He was gone, erased from the platform that defined his existence. I closed my phone and leaned back in the seat of the Rolls-Royce, watching the runway lights of the private airfield come into view. The physical world was quiet. The digital world was corrected. Justice had been served not by a judge, but by the truth. The driver opened my door and I stepped out onto the tarmac, walking toward the waiting jet. I didn't feel guilty. I felt light. The heavy burden of their toxicity was finally gone, leaving me with nothing but the clear, cold air of freedom. Julian wanted to be famous, I thought, climbing the stairs to the plane. Well, now he is infamous. And that is a lesson that will last longer than any viral video. 3 months have passed since the day I walked out of the Harbor View Hotel, leaving the wreckage of my father's marriage in the rearview mirror. 3 months is a long time in the world of venture capital, but it is an eternity in the world of consequences. I was sitting in my office in San Francisco, the morning fog clearing to reveal a brilliant blue sky. On my mahogany desk sat a fresh copy of Forbes magazine. The ink still smelled new and the cover was glossy, reflecting the sunlight. But it was the image on the front that stopped me cold. It was a photo of me standing on the Golden Gate Bridge wearing the same white suit I had worn to the wedding, looking directly into the camera with a gaze that said I was done apologizing. The headline was printed in bold gold letters. The Queen of Venture Capital, Sophia Brooks, on why integrity is the ultimate currency. I ran my fingers over the text. It was strange seeing my name there. I had spent so much of my life trying to be invisible, trying to shrink myself, so I wouldn't offend my father's fragile ego or Carol's insecurities. But now I was plastered on newsstands across the country, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to hide. My assistant, Sarah, buzzed the intercom, snatching me from my thoughts. Sophia, the car is waiting downstairs for the gala. And I have that final update you asked for, regarding the Miller bankruptcy case. I told her to send the file to my tablet as I gathered my things. Walking to the elevator, I read the report on the way down. It was a grim document, a detailed autopsy of a life built on lies. Carol was officially ruined. The investigation sparked by my rejection had uncovered a nest of vipers, fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion that went back a decade. She was currently awaiting trial, and her assets, including her collection of designer bags and that ridiculous wedding dress, had been seized by the government to pay back her creditors. She was living in a state-appointed housing facility, a far cry from the penthouse she had demanded. But the part that made me pause was the paragraph about Marcus. My father had lost the house, not just the house he shared with Carol, but my childhood home in Ohio. Home. My mother had decorated, the home where I had learned to walk. He had sold it at a loss to pay off the high-interest bridge loans he had taken out for the wedding. He was now living in a studio apartment above a garage in a neighborhood he used to make fun of. I closed the file. The screen went black, and I saw my own reflection. I looked for sadness. I looked for guilt. But there was only peace. He had made his choice. He wanted a life without me, and the universe had given him exactly that. A life without me, and without everything I could have given him. The car pulled up to the Palace of Fine Arts, the venue for tonight's event. It was the inaugural gala for the Brooks Foundation, a nonprofit I had launched last month, dedicated to providing full-ride scholarships and seed funding for young minority entrepreneurs, specifically young Black women who had the brilliance but lacked the backing. The scene outside was chaotic, but in the best way possible. There were photographers, there were reporters, and there were real titans of industry. Not the fake social climbers Carol had invited, but actual billionaires, people who changed the world with a keystroke. And they were all there for me. I stepped out of the car and the flashes went off like a lightning storm. I walked the red carpet, answering questions about the foundation, about the future of tech, about the responsibility of wealth. Sophia, a reporter from the New York Times, called out over the noise. "You have had a meteoric rise this year. What is the biggest lesson you have learned about success?" I stopped, turning to face the camera. I thought about Julian crying on the internet. I thought about Carol screaming in a tent. I thought about my father kneeling in the dirt. "I learned that you cannot buy your way into a legacy," I said into the microphone. "And I learned that the most expensive thing you will ever own is your self-respect." I walked inside the ballroom. It was breathtaking, decorated in deep gold and black, elegant and understated. The room was filled with laughter, with deals being made, with connections being formed. But unlike the wedding, there was no tension here. There was no exclusion. This room was filled with people of all colors, all backgrounds, united by ambition and kindness. I made my way to the stage, the applause swelling around me warm and genuine. I saw the faces of the scholarship recipients in the front row. Young girls who looked at me with wide eyes, seeing a possibility they hadn't known existed. I took the microphone, looking out at the sea of supporters. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice steady. "Welcome to a new era." I spoke for 10 minutes about the mission, about the need to open doors for those who had been shut out. But I ended on a personal note, a message for the ghosts of my past and the hope of my future. For a long time I was told I didn't fit in. I said, looking around the magnificent room. I was told I wasn't sophisticated enough. I wasn't the right aesthetic. I was told that, in order to be classy, I had to erase who I was. I raised my glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light. But tonight, looking at all of you, I realize how wrong that definition was. Class isn't about exclusion. It isn't about making people feel small so you can feel big. And it certainly isn't about spending money. You do not have to impress people you do not like. I paused, letting the words land. Real class is lifting others up. Real class is telling the truth, even when it shakes the room. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of lightness. The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. All that was left was the work. So let us make a toast to the future, to building tables where everyone has a seat, and to remembering the most important rule of all. I looked directly into the camera, knowing that somewhere in a lonely studio apartment, my father was watching. Classy is kindness and power combined. I took a sip of the wine, the taste sweet and rich. Then I walked off the stage and into the crowd, ready to greet my real family. The end. This experience taught me that true class has nothing to do with exclusive guest lists or imported flowers. It is defined by integrity and how you treat the people who love you. For years, I chased my father's validation, thinking I wasn't enough. But standing on that stage, I realized that his rejection was actually my liberation. You cannot buy self-worth, and you certainly cannot find it in people who view you as a liability. The most powerful investment you will ever make is in yourself, and the courage to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to find your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice.